Okay, we are live here with the inimitable, the certainly cannot be copied, Mr. David Osk, and we want to talk about something today that, on its surface, I think is kind of simple, right? Using the words, these three-letter word to two-letter word, yes and no, but how to really master it. Despite the fact that it might seem simple to say these words, every day in my office, I work with clients. These are people that are very successful, right? They certainly they don't struggle with a lack of, I think, assertiveness. Yet, despite that, they find a tremendous amount of frustration that they're saying yes to things that they really don't want to say yes to. They feel overcommitted, right? And the compound effect of saying yes to things that you don't really want to say yes to, things that don't fit, that clearly don't point true north for you, right, is a buildup of resentment, of regret, of anxiety, of all these things that certainly over time, right, they just lead to burnout. They lead to broken relationships. They lead to failed health. And so the ability to master it, and I think what people struggle with is they feel like if they say no, they feel like it's selfish. They feel like they're going to disappoint people, and they don't want to do that, right? They have good intentions, but unfortunately, what they do in that is they end up not prioritizing their own, kind of process, and they actually really bitchy. They're how they show up. If you're not really intrinsically motivated to do something and you're showing up, you're kind of spreading yourself thin and underperforming in a lot of areas. Does that make sense?
Oh yeah, I think one of the biggest shifts for me, personally, in the last few years is, I mean, it's yeah, it's making those choices, right? It's that yes and no. I'm like, I feel like I've said no to more things in the last few years that have really freed up my time, and you only have a certain capacity, and so for me lately, even this past year, saying no to all kinds of things was kind of liberating. And in the past, I think I said yes to a lot of things. Part of it, honestly, I mean, Andy, you know me well, just my personality. I'm like, I'm out there, right? I'm doing stuff.
Yeah.
I'm just, incredibly social, all that kind of thing. So it's kind of easy for me to say yes to, especially social situations. But yeah, I'm totally tracking what you say yes to, right, repeatedly, and no to, for that matter. Like you mentioned, on the outset here, that compound effect. Oh my gosh, it's what builds your life, and it can either head in a peaceful direction or not. So
How do you do it? So, it's one thing maybe for, request people that you don't have a close connection to. But when it comes to like your spouse, or it comes to business partners, close friends, and they're asking you to do something, I don't know, how do you delineate on, do I say yes to this? Maybe I really don't want to, but I know it's important to them. I'm sure that, inevitably you end up saying yes to things that they probably wouldn't be in our autonomous, true north zone. But the impact for someone that we care about is well worth, right, saying yes to. But I don't know, what's your distinction? How do you decide what to say yes to or no to? And what's it like saying no to someone that you really care about, and knowing that they may not like that answer?
yeah, so what's interesting is when you've decided in advance, what you're going to say yes to. That there's that we often talk about. There's the whatever urgent, and then the necessary, that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
And I think you and I are on the same level with regards to the goal of life is relationships, period. The rest of it to me is a context. So of course, in advance, I've already prioritized, the people in my life that I'm going to say yes to a whole lot quicker.
It's good.
At the same time, what's neat is I think I've developed enough emotional capital with people, that interface with me, that if I do say no, I know it's for a good reason. It's like, hey, I actually can't do that right now, and I'll say sorry. I know that kind of lets you down or something like that, but they understand that I have noble intent wherever I go. So I think understanding what to say yes and no to in the context of relationship, you have to have a rapport with people, that are closest to you, so they understand some of those things. But again, I say yes to people that I love way more than an acquaintance. Right? I mean, it makes a lot of sense. But guess what? That sounds obvious, but it is not. Because in the past, especially with Lisa when I first got married, I was saying yes to all kinds of people. Because they'd say, hey, can you come and sing here or participate in this and that kind of stuff. when I felt like, she was getting a bit of a back seat. And I sure hope that that's not the case after almost 23 years.
Yeah, I see that a lot, and I love what you say about predetermining, right? I mean, I think that's a lot of what we talk about, the kind of setting a true north, and to make the quick distinction between true north and magnetic north. And I think it's a fascinating concept, but true north is a constant, stable, fixed point, right? It's always the geographical true north. Magnetic north is constantly shifting. It's reading the electromagnetic field of the Earth. Now, granted, I'm sure there are some people out there that are much better, using compasses and needles, and magnetic north is probably pretty reliable. But if you think about it in human terms, right, that if we don't pre-commit and have some preset kind of stable fixed points that we know, right, these things just matter more. These things are so important to us that we're not going to deviate. And for me, I know, God, my relationship there, my family, those things point true north. Those are my top two values. If I'm making a decision that aligns with that affirms that builds that, it's an easy yes. But magnetic north, if I haven't preset those, I haven't predetermined, right, then essentially it creates almost a sense of moral relativism, right? Where it's like, I might be saying yes to things with my group of friends that is totally incompatible with who I would be at home, totally different than who I want to be at church with my community there. And it fragments, it starts to pull you apart, right? And it really does. It's exhausting, it's tiring, and it can create a lot of issues if somehow these kind of worlds commingle, right? Or, your spouse sees, what you're talking about, the things you're doing. It can pull you in a lot of directions that I've just seen be very dangerous. So love that distinction of that kind of predetermined sense of understanding, the things that just have a disproportionate amount of weight on what you're going to say yes to.
Yeah, and I think too, again, I feel like most people would say, on face value, or if they're, driving down the road, listening to this, they're like, yeah, I've kind of done that, or yeah, I know it's valuable to me. And I'll be honest, I think that most people probably don't have a sense of their unique true north. They would have a global, maybe a cultural sense of, well, this stuff is, these things are priorities to me. But if you look under the hood and you actually see, where are you spending your time? Where are you spending your money? Are your relationships, closest to you, are they kind of stressed, right? Well, you're probably not really even acting that out. And that's why I love that you use the word, pre-commit. I mean, that word commitment, when someone would say, hey, I've made a commitment, that's
right.
That's pretty, it's black and white, right? I mean, that's, of course you think of commitment in marriage, that kind of thing. I mean, till death do us part. I mean, this is like, okay, this is super black and white. But I think there's a lot of times we think that we've done that. But then if you start looking at the, some of the pain in our lives, we're like, oh man, yeah, I really haven't gotten clarity on what I specifically value.
We get feedback, right? I mean, if we are saying yes to the wrong things, we'll get internal feedback, right? We'll start to feel just overwhelmed. We'll feel stressed. We'll feel, dissatisfied. A lot of those things. But if I'm saying yes to things that is then cutting into my commitment to my wife and to my kids, I'm certainly going to get commitment, some feedback there. And what I've seen with some, again, well-intentioned individuals, some clients that I've worked with that are in charge of running, big organizations, and they will tell me in private, that my relationship with my wife and kids is the most important thing. But if you were to pull out their schedule, right, and then you were able to actually follow them around for a week or two to say, well, where are you spending the bulk of your time? Who's getting the very best of you? It's very clear that, what they're saying to me and their actual actions are not aligned. And they carry, right? It's not unnoticed. They just justify it, right? They start making excuses and rationalize and things like that, because it's not something that's fixed, right? It's not something they pre-committed to. And so it becomes very easy, kind of moral relativism, right? It becomes very easy to start to explain it away or say, well, this is just, what I've committed to as this role, and I'm the breadwinner and those things. But it creates a tremendous amount of collateral damage. And I've seen these same very people, when they do the work, right, and they define their values, and then they start recognizing the small moments, right? Do I choose to stay a little bit later with the guys at the bar and do this, right? Or do I choose to go home, right? I've had fun, and now I'm going to go home, and I'm going to pay attention to my wife and kids. that it's totally possible for them to still commit and show up and do amazing work. In fact, I think when you say yes to the right things and no to the right things, it actually, you show up even more intentional, right? You show up with your very best energy in multiple places. So now they're showing up at home with radical commitment, and they're showing up with work in the sense of integrity, right? When their employees recognize like, hey, this guy's committed to his family. And so, they recognize that you're going to have a boundary. People respect you more. It's just true. I know what's your thoughts on that?
Yeah, and I like that you brought up some of those pain points. When I know that I've been overcommitted, I mean, I get to the point. I mean, in general, everybody goes through some really hard times in life, right?
Right.
The hard times in my life, most of them have been brought on by me. Making choices that just stink. And what's fascinating though is when I feel like I'm getting overcommitted, even the good things become at the very least dull to me, right? That's like our senses just get overloaded. When I think about walking into the living room with Parker and Kate and Lisa, most of the time, honestly, my heart's full. I see them and I'm like, oh man, just crazy excited to be Lisa's husband and their dad, and just experience all the goofy stuff that we do and meaningful stuff and all of that. But I know that, and they'll be the first to tell you, when dad is overloaded, when dad's overcommitted, I can breeze by everybody, and even what I'm doing, I'm not really engaged in. There's that sense of everything just becomes dull, and the lens that I start seeing things through is foggy and that kind of stuff. So it's really obvious, like you said. There's clues. We can follow those clues. If I'm feeling that sense of overload and burnout, that's really telling.
Yeah, and there's a disproportionate, right? I think what you're saying too is that when I say yes to things that really are important to me, that matter to me, things I'm intrinsically motivated by, that's a great use of my strengths, what I get and what I give and what I get, right, disproportionately fuels me. As opposed to when I show up to things and it feels like obligatory, right? Or, I really just am not that committed. I'm begrudgingly going, all those things. It's disproportionately taxing, right? It really is depleting. And so it really is amazing, the simple effect. I remember having a client that I was working with last year who, when we went through her values, she had her values for work, hadn't really defined her personal values. And I was like, you realize that these shouldn't be different, right? They should be the same. So we got those dialed in, and she kept talking about this one client that she had. It was her biggest client, right? The person who paid her more than anybody else. But this person just weighed on her and criticized her, and she would just carry so much stress, and that stress got carried into her marriage. It got carried into with her kids. And I said, hey, have you ever run through this client, right? Is this someone you should have said yes to? Is this a good fit? Does this person align with your values? She went through and it was like a clear no on all 5 of her values. And I said, I understand, this might be scary, but I think it might be in your best interest to refer her to someone else and open up space to work with someone that is a great fit. Her initial reaction was like, you're crazy, no way. But eventually she came to a point to recognize that this just was having such a negative effect on her, right? Continue to work with this person. So she very professionally was able to transition that client to someone else. And then within 2 weeks, she found 2 other clients that actually ended up, between the 2 of them, she made more money, who were perfect fits. And the amount of joy and just the sense of satisfaction that she felt working with them, right? And displacing kind of all that negative energy, it was amazing. Again, that compound effect, right? How that then affected her coming home. She just came home lighter, right? More ready to engage, to be committed there. So it's amazing, what happens when you just start exercising your yes and no's correctly.
Oh man, I have a very similar story with a buddy of mine who was here last week and told me that same thing. And he just said, I feel like the weight of the world's been lifted. Before we sat down, I started brainstorming about, some words that describe, your clear yes. And one of those things was confidence, clarity, freedom, or a few of those, and stable. And of course, my number one favorite word is inspired. And what's fascinating is I find that, if I've said yes to some things that do not align with my predetermined values, right? The things absolute bedrock to who I am, right? I mean, it's the word inspiration for me goes right out the window, and my sense of self. I mean, I just feel like I'm kind of shrinking, and you get that sense you're just less than, and oh man, everything's harder. Brushing my teeth is harder, and yeah, I mean, it's way more. Um, this topic is has way more gravity to it than we would just in a casual conversation realize. This is choices are what make up the rest of this day, the rest of this week.
Oh yeah.
Your life, right? It's bedrock. And boy, you start saying yes to things. Hey, one other thing I was going to say too, as you were talking, that I think is really important, that I've given myself permission to do.
Right.
If I'm going to say no to something, I realize that it's not no forever. It's just not right now.
That's right.
I can take that thing and just put it on the shelf and say, yeah, this is not for this season. Whatever, it might be a week, it might be a year, and on a very tangible level, right? I like developing products. I mean, I like creation. I've got several other products that I would like to bring to market. But guess what? It doesn't align with what I've said yes to right now. So I'm choosing to just, push those things, off for a while anyway. So it's hard for me to do that though.
Yeah. And I don't know, I imagine, I know, through the work that we've done and that we do together, I think we have some filters. I have some filters that I use on, what I choose to say yes to, that really helps me. And again, kind of that notion of predetermining, if you haven't, clearly identified that just some things are more important, that are hell yeses. And, I don't know if anybody out there has heard, if it's not a hell yes, then it's a no. Yeah. I do love that concept. I don't think it's always quite as simple as that. There are some things that aren't hell yeses for me that are still, a clear, authentic yes. But when you don't have that predetermined, then essentially you're often relying on either emotions or kind of like the gravitational pull of that moment, right? Someone comes and you just really don't want to disappoint. You want the person to see you well. There's a variety of factors that come in that make it tough in real time. So if you haven't predetermined, one thing that I would suggest, it's okay to just let me take some time to think about it, right? Give a pause. I'll reiterate my favorite personal growth quote from Viktor Frankl: between a stimulus, between what happens to us and our response, there's a space. And in that space is where our capacity for growth and freedom exists. So exercise that space, right? Allow yourself to use it. Tell someone that I would love to come back to you, but let me take some time to really think about this. So you can be intentional, right? Not let the emotion dictate how you decide what to do there. But the factors that we use, right? So we've already talked about values. So values is a clear, right? If it doesn't line up with any of the values, that should be the quickest no, and run in the opposite direction as fast as you can. Right. If it aligns with your top, 1, 2, 3 values, that should be a clear yes. So values is the first filter I use. The second one is, am I intrinsically motivated to do this? Right. Is this something, am I doing it because, I want the applause, I want the approval, I want the affirmation, right? That, and sometimes that's okay to say yes to, right? But my commitment runs much deeper, and it's going to be much more rewarding and fulfilling. And I'm actually going to perform better, right? If it's something that, hey, I autonomously want to do this. It's important to me. It's a great use of my strengths. I believe I can do it. And it feels significant, meaningful, and important, and impactful to me, right? Those things, hell yes, over and over and over again, right? And when I do things that are extrinsically motivated, I can tell you, even when they're successful, I end up generally feeling dissatisfied, right? I get that dopamine hit, but that dopamine doesn't last. And,
right.
And then I'm left wanting. So then the last one is it a good use of my strengths? I mean, do I know what my strengths are? And do I feel like that this is a great use of them and it has the impact that I want? If I get a yes on all 3 of those, I mean, that is something I am, I'm not standing on the threshold. I am both feet in, all in on that. What do you think?
Yeah, I think it's fascinating. Again, part of this is that self-awareness piece. And I think in our society, when everybody's going 90 miles an hour and, you've got all types of marketing thrown at you, all the shoulds, all this stuff. My friend Cindy always, we're all shoulded to death and all that kind of stuff. It's easy when you don't understand your values to start saying yes to things. And so one of the things I think we need to be really clear about, and and maybe this is an understatement, you can correct me if I'm wrong here, but when people hear words like identity and core values and authenticity, that kind of stuff, sometimes you're like, roll your eyes a little bit. But I like to break it down that if the core values, is it valuable?
Yeah.
The word value, is it valuable to you? Identity, is it what you identify with, right? Authenticity, what's authored in here, right? What's going on? So that self-awareness piece, if you're lacking that, is tough. But here's a way that I think to kind of turn it on its head, right? For those of us who are married or not, for that matter, if you look at your spouse and you see, it's much easier to see pain points in somebody else, especially if they're letting you down. So you can see that, on a kind of an observer level, that person doesn't know what's valuable to them. Why? Now they're stressed out, they're fragmented, they're mad or easily angered, or they're just seem overloaded, they're tired, they're not taking care of themselves. And there's so many signs that someone has not identified that pre-commitment.
Right.
This is valuable to me, and this is not. And I mean, I think to simplify it in that way really helps me to lay hold of it and so on. So I think when I understand what's valuable, well, what's fascinating is when I act in accordance with that. Honestly, you mentioned the motivation piece, the verb. If I take action in that area, right, it becomes kind of motivating to me. It's like, wait a second, that feels good. So then I follow those clues, and it kind of reinforces what I have already pre-committed to that I find valuable. So I love the like you said, the virtuous loop that just takes place naturally there.
An interesting thing for me, my tendency sometimes to say yes to the wrong things often comes from people that often sometimes aren't even in my inner circle, right? Or I have an easier time, unfortunately, saying no probably to my wife. My kids, not so much, I will say. I'm not, I love to say yes to them. But for me, I have a natural tendency to feel like kind of protective. There's something called psychological reactants, right? That when someone asks you or tells you need to do this or should do this, we start to resist it, right? Because it doesn't feel like something we've autonomously chosen. So I certainly have that, right? And have experienced that, throughout my life, and I can tell when I'm feeling it. But one of my, kind of the backgrounds, one of the things historically that I bring into, my decision making is I've always had this fear of just things piling up on me, getting overwhelmed and feel like I'm drowning. Right. I know where that comes from. But so I have a tendency sometimes to say no to things out of kind of the self-protective, right, of a fear-based place,
right,
that I really should be saying yes to.
Yeah.
And so I know that's, for me, that's one of the things I have to be mindful of, and to really recognize, like, wait a minute, don't just do the reactive, reflexive, saying no. You're safe, right? Got to kind of, again, allow that emotion to just pass, stay calm in it. I have a tendency sometimes to overreact to an emotion.
Yeah.
It comes, and then I start to think, oh no, this is a harbinger of doom, all these things. And all of a sudden now, right, that feedback loop, I've allowed it to build momentum instead of just saying, nope, it's just an emotion, right? If I just simply pause, stay calm and still, I'm going to allow my prefrontal cortex enough time to eventually kick in. And now I can start to access my values and think through what I really want to do. So that's something I've had to be very intentional about, because of what I know I bring into my decision making because of my past. Does that make sense?
Absolutely. And here's what's fascinating too is one of the things, right, as far as what I find valuable, of course, is my faith. And and God's word says, in the counsel of many, there's safety, right? There's wisdom. Yeah. So one of the things that I've chosen to do, as far as the things that I find valuable, is to surround myself with wise counsel.
Yeah. Yep.
I'm in a mode like that, which happens a lot, right? We're human, we get kind of fragmented. Well, guess what? I'm not alone, and I've got people that I can, bounce ideas off of, that kind of thing, that would say, yeah, I think this does align, or you know what, you're feeling that way because, there's some room to at least pause and tap the brakes. So I think that to think that we have to do this on our own, of course, in the blueprint course, we've got people going through it right now, as a group, right? And it's so fascinating to see that, identity, the valuable things being brought forth in a way in community, because you kind of need someone to read your label and bounce things off of, and scrub up against that kind of stuff. And it's fascinating how those things then become galvanized, really, really quickly when you have that, kind of a team around you.
I love how Curtis is a common friend who actually created a podcast with. So he went through the material, right, and really he's like charismatic, just a really an awesome guy. But as I got feedback from him to say, you've done a lot of personal growth stuff. What were some of the benefits you got out of this that were unique? And he talked about the amount of material. It felt like he got like 7 years worth of personal growth in about the 10-week period that we went through it in. But he said that his yeses, he started recognizing how organically, automatically, because he had pre-committed, right? Those aspects of those filters, the values, what's driving this. Is it a great use of my strengths and the virtuous impact I want to have? He started automatically saying yes to the right things and saying no to things that didn't align with that. And the amount of stuff that he accomplished, I mean, he started to list off, and it made me feel like a slacker. I was like, that was a bad choice of questions for him. But yeah, I mean, that guy is amazing. But he said that he just spends less time having to correct, right? Kind of when he makes a bad choice, whether that is the self-correction of self-doubt, beating yourself up, and he spends less time needing to repair, relationship damage. Right. For saying no to things. And so he said, I'm spending more time in flow state. I'm spending more time in that ideal state. And it creates kind of the momentum, the virtuous loop that all of a sudden you start, doing more that aligns with true north. And you're creating so much radical momentum towards true north when you start to say yes to the right things and no. Reminds me of one other quick story of a client that I had who's a CEO of a very successful company, really good guy. But he was saying yes to things that was putting some of his relationships that mattered most, they're putting them in real conflict and in danger. And, he didn't even know, right? He's like, I don't know, like this relationship's important to me. I don't know why I keep making this decision. And yet I keep putting myself, it didn't take long, right? We just simply said, well, what was the legacy? What were the imprints that kind of shaped, who you are? And we kind of saw that, he'd been modeled some of the same behaviors. So we didn't need to spend much more time on it than that, right? That was like literally, I think, one session. But then we said, let's start dialing in what you do want to say yes to. Let's start dialing in things that have enough emotional gravity, right? The core values that matter so much to you that they will help pause those moments, the automatic response that you're doing right now that's destructive. Yeah. So you can he just started noticing, right? Jokes that he would make at that person's expense that, he just thought were harmless, but they weren't. He started being able to pause. He stopped doing those, right? He stopped saying yes to invitations that were temptation you shouldn't say yes to, right? And the compound effect over a couple of months repaired that relationship so it is in the best place it's ever been. Mm-hmm. That person said all around, right? As I started to recognize, what to say yes at what point of true north, he's like, man, I'm a better friend. I am a better dad. I am a better leader, right? Even though I led a huge company, people they followed me because of my title, but now, right, I say yes to leaning into building relationships, caring about them, knowing their stories. So it's really amazing, right? Just what can happen when you start shifting what you're saying yes and no to.
Yeah, I love that. And again, it's that you often use that word, inner size. We think of exercise or inner size, but you have to do that work. You've got to have a real understanding of the internal wherewithal and what you're standing upon. And some people think it's 10 years of therapy and
right.
therapy or something else. And no, it's actually very very practical and quite easy to come to a real clear vocabulary on these are the things that I value, this is what I don't, and just to start saying yes to those things. And then of course you just see your joy rise, and that's all there is to it. I find that I have in the last few years I've said yes to some things that have caused my joy to rise like I've never thought even possible. And here's what's fascinating though is I have more time now for me, and it's I'm literally carving out this year. I've decided to set certain days aside just to have some me time, that kind of stuff, and it feels really great. And to place a higher priority than I have in the past, on having some fun and doing some things like that, or getting together with people more often, because I personally so love, having coffee with somebody and just talking about ideas and greatness, that kind of stuff. So I'm carving out and making time for that in my life. I'm saying yes to that. And of course, if you say yes to something, you're saying no to something else. And it's a bit more, the umbrella, I think, is a bit more complex at face value. But then when you start getting in a little bit, it's actually easier to dial in than I think it is.
Totally agree, right? I mean, we all have this like gold within us, right? I don't know what you want to call it. It's your conscience, and it's your inner compass, right? And when you just start to clear off the distractions, the noise, and you create enough space to kind of dig in there, right? And really be able to allow that compass to kind of come out, it's amazing. And it really is. In some regards, it's easier than you might think, and it's simpler. In other regards, right, it requires the willingness or the capacity to just dig deep, right? There are things that we just don't often spend a lot of time reflecting on and thinking about, and so we've got to kind of dust off the machinery internally on how to do it. But when you find it and you're able to dial it in, the results are undeniably, there's exponential returns on doing so. A quick question. What has been, as you, because I know you said no to a couple of things recently, right? Things that were potentially great opportunities, things that I think you had said yes to in the past. Have you gotten any weird responses? Like, what's been the weirdest? Have you gotten people that have just been really angry? How have people responded to your no's?
No, it's interesting. The first thing that came to mind there was a musical opportunity in Chicago, and I mean, the person who's asking is persistent. So they're offering more money and saying nicer things to kind of stuff. So it's actually was harder the second and now third time to say no. But to me, in the past, and again, it's at face value an incredible opportunity. That years ago I would have I wouldn't. Just to be asked, I probably wouldn't even have slept that night, honestly. But now I'm like, it is just a great opportunity. But I'm not looking forward to that to kind of define me either, right?
Yeah.
I was in the past, I would kind of look to, a gig like that, if you will, to kind of validate me, or hey, I'm somebody, I'm doing something really cool.
Yeah.
And honestly, the things that I have defined as really cool and exciting are just different. And it's not to take away from that, what they're doing, right?
Yeah.
But I don't know. That's what came to mind.
I love, I think not only, is there an element of knowing what to say yes to and no to, but I think an understanding of why. I recently created content. I love creating content, right? It's something that I'm certainly intrinsically motivated. In the past, sometimes I would write something up, I'd publish it, I'd put it out, and I felt this inner fragility, right? Like, oh no, please affirm me. I don't know if I can take any criticism, but why I create content now and why I say yes to things, I have clarity. I know, why it's important to me. And so I put something out a few months ago on something, and the very first response, I do have a tendency to be a little wordy, right? I'm not the one that, Twitter has never been my friend, 140 characters, whatever it is. But the first response was a bunch of Z's, it said Cliff Notes, please. And that would have in the past, I would have been in my head, right, thinking of all kinds of terrible, kind of comebacks, and that would have been beating myself up. He's right, all these things. But I just, was able to kind of laugh about it. And I did send a response. It's like, hey, I get this may not be for you, right? I certainly didn't write this, for someone that, kind of catered to the shortened attention spans. But it was fun for me to write, right? I found this intriguing. I found it challenging, and I thought it was important. And I had peace. I genuinely had peace. So I felt a strength and a resolve within me that whether or not it got the response, and interestingly enough, like the next 50 responses were really, really positive, and it kind of given that person a little crap for their response. And I know you recently did a performance, won't say where, right? But you had an amazing opportunity, but you got up in front of everyone and you explained exactly what your intention was. And I love that. When you told me that, I had goosebumps. I don't know if you can talk about just, the clarity of why you said yes to that, or just even the intention, like why you did that.
Yeah, you know what was interesting in the moment, so that the audience is, was rather intimidating, right? And so at the same time, and I could tell that they had just finished dinner, and I wanted to grab their attention, right? I don't consider myself dinner music. I don't.
Yeah.
And at the same time, I feel like in everything I do, I feel very intrinsically motivated to have impact. Anybody who knows me knows that they're not going to leave my presence, I hope, without feeling better that they've spent time with me. I love that, and I don't feel like I'm drumming anything up. That's just me. So I got up and I told everybody, hey, thanks for having me, but I have 3 goals tonight, and that's to cause you to have a higher affection for your family. They were all sitting at the tables with their family.
Right.
I want to increase your love for one another. I want to put a smile on your face tonight. And then, you know me, I love goosebumps, and I love the things that give your goosebumps. And it was amazing when I said that, right? All of a sudden, everybody was like, oh, wow, okay. Part of it was, if you tell somebody you're going to give them goosebumps, you better be able to back it up. So I was, granted I'm 47 and I've been singing long enough, and I'm confident in what I'm doing. But more than that, I had chosen songs, that talk about bigger truths, right? That talk about, even the what is it? The language of the heart, right? Poetry in a lot of ways. You can't just write a sentence that really captures what someone's truly feeling, and that's why music to me is so powerful. And so, of course, I chose songs that would cause them to be moved, and to look up, and to look within, and to look at the other person across from them, and forget about hopefully the stupid argument they had on the way there, that kind of stuff. But yeah, I feel incredibly intrinsically, as you say, motivated to have an inspirational impact on those around me. I feel like it's why I'm here, on a very base level. So that's me. It's not for everybody, right? I hope they have their identity is something different, of course, and it should be. But that's something that's very near and dear to my heart.
Love that, the impact, right? I know that was a very successful performance, and I think you had several people come up to you afterwards, right? And had some incredible feedback and requests. I mean, to not only say yes to something, but to say, here's why I'm saying yes, and here's my intention, right, in doing that. Like, my goodness, I mean, that there's a level of intentionality there that's just really, I think, special. And it inspires me, right? I think I've done that from time to time, but it makes me want to do that more. I mean, imagine doing that with my kids. Hey, I'm saying yes to, I'm gonna take my daughter out on a daddy-daughter date here. I'm pretty soon. She's 8, and so I'm just gonna kind of start this process. I'm really excited, but I want to really lay out my intentions, right? I want to be very clear. I want to remove as much ambiguity and as much uncertainty as possible, and let her know exactly why I'm saying yes to this and why this is important to me. And I think just the power of that, right? When someone knows, like, it removes, why are they doing, what's their real intentions?
Yeah.
When you're just upfront and clear, because you know what those are. Oof, man, that's powerful.
And
by the way, Teresa, thank you, from Portugal.
Some comments.
Portugal is a beautiful country. I don't know if you've ever been there. Some of the most delicious food and pastries. And I got a chance to go to Fatima, and I mean, had just an incredibly spiritual experience there. Anyways, thanks, Teresa.
Yeah, it's fun to see the comments and people, chiming in. This is, again, as we kind of wind things up here, right? This is what your life is built on, and your life is precious, and it should be. And for those who whatever it is, Shakespeare that said, "To thine own self be true," right? If you've not done some of that, you're just sorely missing out. Yeah. And I think, of course, you mentioned your sweet girl there. Both of us have a daughter, and I just think, boy, if I hadn't done some of that work, think of what our daughters and our sons would be missing out on. Let alone us, right?
Yeah. Yep.
Life is way too short and too precious and valuable to let someone else or something else set that agenda for you. And then whatever way the wind is blowing today, there I go again. That kind of nonsense doesn't have to
co-ops your identity, right? It co-ops your autonomy, your identity. Yeah. So true. It, as we're saying this, it makes me even think, that I have to say yes or no sometimes to arguments I get into, right? So sometimes a piece of bait will be put out, right, where it's like, oh, I really, that was frustrating, it was angry, it was disappointing, and I have to realize there's a choice. There's an I have the option on whether or not I want to get into this feedback loop, into a conflict feedback loop, or whether or not I want to say, no, it's not how I want to interact with this person. That's not the impact I want to have. So it's amazing, right? I mean, the power of yes and no, as you said, it literally has the ability to define our day. The more I say yes to God, and I feel like, my life's heading that direction, I have a peace that I certainly, that's supernatural. So
no question. Yeah, and it's funny because if you've experienced it, right, you've gone through that process, you see the supernatural effect. But yet it's kind of mundane and ordinary. But look down the road, look at that long-term effect, and oh my goodness, what a difference.
So if anybody out there is listening to this, like, they're struggling, right? They feel like their life is just kind of flooded with saying yes to the wrong things, and they just kind of feel trapped in it, right? Because it can feel addicting. I know a lot of people, who are known to just be generous with their time, and they give away so much of it, but internally they're really unhappy, right? It's like, yes, I do, and I commit to all these volunteering, I do all these things, but they have no time for themselves. They have no personal time. And I remember reading really quickly a book on moral exemplars in grad school, and it was really fascinating. These are people that had incredible impact on the society and community, and I mean, really like amazing set philanthropic causes. But oftentimes their personal life was a mess, right? Like their own children, they had broken relationships, they had bad personal health hygiene and things like that. And I don't think that's necessary, right? You don't have to if you're committed to a really important cause, or building a great business, that doesn't mean that you have to then say no to other important areas of life. It's nonsense, right? So just let's get that misnomer or myth out of the way. You can say yes to all the right things and have impact in multiple areas of life. That feels amazing. So if you need help with that, please send us a message. We'd be happy in any way that we can to give you resources and help, because we believe that this is a really important issue. So
if not the most important issue, right? Man, it's anyway, great conversation today.
Yeah, likewise. All right, brother, have a great week, everyone. Have a great weekend.
Thanks.